Hey everyone, Rob here, and what you're about to hear is one of the final episodes of the Crooked Table podcast. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere, but the show in its current form is coming to an end. Still, from the ashes of the Crooked Table podcast will rise the era of Crooked Table Productions. Starting this summer, we'll be launching 3 brand new shows. These include Showstoppers, a seasonal show spotlighting 2 actors. In this first season, my lovely wife Kai and I will shine a light on the careers of Jim Carrey and Drew Barrymore. Franchise Detours, wherein a guest and I will discuss the many twists and turns of a popular movie series, including our upcoming mega series on the Child's Play movies. And finally, this feed will transform into Close Watch with Robert Yanis Jr., in which I get to know a guest through the prism of a movie they love. But that's all coming up. For now, let's listen in for one of the final times to the Crooked Table podcast.
Welcome to the Crooked Table podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table podcast. This is Rob. On this episode, returning guest Jamie Williams and I break down the original Marvel movie. No, not Iron Man. Nope, not X-Men either. Hell, not even Blade. No, this episode will quack ourselves up over 1986's Howard the Duck. The movie, of course, has an infamous reputation, one of the worst movies ever made. It was a big flop for producer George Lucas at the time. But is it worth revisiting now in the age of the MCU? We're getting so many comic book movies left and right. Does Howard the Duck have anything unique or distinctive to say, regardless of, how you want to judge its quality? Well, let's hop a laser beam over to Duckworld and take a look at Howard the Duck. We're joined this week by Jamie Williams. So Jamie Williams, before you tell us why we're talking Howard the Duck, explain to the people a little bit about yourself.
This is my 3rd time appearance on the show. We discussed Man the Moon, and then I think we did Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Yep.
Right now, I was a writer for several different websites, the now defunct IESB and Screen Rant, and co-founder of a site called ThinkMyFlightThink.com, regular movie news pundit, and just like all of us trying to get by making a buck every day.
We were going back and forth talking about what your 3rd appearance on the show was going to be after Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, as you mentioned. And you threw several ideas at me, and one of them was Howard the Duck. So before we get to Howard the Duck, this being the first real Marvel movie, I think the only thing they'd really put out before this with some Captain America serials in like the 40s. So where do you land on Marvel movies or comic book movies in general right now? Obviously, they're driving the industry. 1 being Martin Scorsese, that's not cinema. 5 being like the Zack Snyder cultists. Where do you sit on comic book movies generally?
I'm kind of bored with them right now. I mean, it's weird because me and you are the same age, and we can remember going on the movie news sites back when it was only 3 of them, and like waiting for the day that we'd get comic book movies. And in the 90s growing up, like, what did we get? We got Batman sequels, and then we got the weird ones like Dick Tracy and Shadow, Phantom, what else? Rocketeer. And then we got some really oddball Ninja Turtles, and then we got like Tank Girl, Barbed Wire, Judge Dredd, Steel, Spawn. I think I named them all. But like, it was weird, like we weren't getting the big dogs, and we kept praying that one day we could get them. And what do we, be careful what you wish for. I'm kind of bored with them at this point, man. Yeah,
I could see that. I think there's definitely a certain, and this is more true with Marvel, obviously. There's definitely the formula is sort of wearing thin. That's why when they shake things up and they do something like, WandaVision, which is so different from anything else they've done before, I'm like, all right, they're trying here. They're like giving us some effort. I mean, I'm obviously way more plugged into all that stuff than you. I'm more of a sucker for the comic book stuff, but even I have to admit, like, very few of those are quote great movies or anything. They're more serving the business side of it than the creative side. But I'm still be lying if I didn't say that I'm curious and about what they have in the pipeline, and that I'm kind of on board to at least check it out. That doesn't mean I'm gonna put it on a pedestal like some people do, but yeah, no, I feel you. We're like in a complete dearth of comic book movies when Howard the Duck comes out. I think the first Marvel movie, as we said. I think before that was basically Superman movies, and that's about it. That sounds about right.
That sounds about right. Superman, Swamp Thing, but
Supergirl was a couple of years before this.
Supergirl, yeah. Like I think there's been a Tarzan movie, Sheena. There's been a Conan and Rosonia. Not many. I mean, it's funny because you mentioned WandaVision. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up Howard the Duck, because it's getting a lot of praise for being weird and different. And I like weird and different, especially with the sameness that the Marvel films are really going for, have been going for many years now. But, you know, and I certainly, I was sort of frustrated with the first 2 episodes of WandaVision because I thought, okay, I got the joke, move on. You know, it wasn't really that unique of an idea of, hey, let's make the 50s sitcoms. I mean, I have a lot of memories watching Hi Honey, I'm Home on Nick at Night in the early 90s. And then a lot of people did their version of lampooning sitcoms during that time period, to the point where there's even a infamous Hi Home from the UK, one where it's Hitler so when I hear the praise about being weird and different, I think, you know, okay, I'll give you that. But if you really want weird, you got to go to Howard the Duck. Yeah. Just, you know, I will not, you know, I think everyone listening to this right now, and Robert and I only talked like maybe 5 minutes before we started recording. Was a lot of laughter between Robert, because it was like, yeah, we're talking about Howard the Duck. And it's not a good movie. Can we just say that up front, sir?
Yeah, I think that's, I feel like it's empirical fact at this point.
We should just put that out there. It's not a good movie, but I like it. And the reason I like it is it's unapologetically weird.
Right.
It makes no bones of contention about you're going to go with this or you're not. And I wish more movies did that nowadays. And it's amazing that like it got chastised in '86 for being that. And you look at the movies that they were making at that time period, studios, they had balls, they took risks. And for anyone to say they made that when after the movie bombed, I would counter that with, you know, the year before Universal took a risk on a weird, equally weird fantasy adventure film that was comedic, also fish out of water elements, and also had, instead of bestiality, incest undercurrent. Back to the Future.
With Lea Thompson.
That's right, with Lea Thompson. And that was the biggest movie that year, by a big margin. So I feel like Universal probably like, all right, it's my like. Although I must say that, you know, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, God bless them, are infinitely better writers than Willard Hayek and the late Gloria Katz. With all due respect, I can easily, being executive at that time period, reading both scripts, going, I'm going to make Back to the Future. That's like they studied script in film school. Nobody's studying the Howard the Duck script, Robert.
Except they're like, don't do this. It didn't work out well the first time.
Exactly.
This is one that when I was really little, I remember watching a lot. As like, I don't know, in the 80s. I was born in 83. So I was 3 when this came out. I probably saw it a couple years later. And I remember watching this as a kid and really being into it. Just because that was, you know, the mid late 80s, first of all the children's entertainment was weird. I mean, Pee-wee's Playhouse and things like that, which I'm actually watching with my daughter now, which has been an experience in and of itself. You know, the puppets and the stop motion elements of it, like that, all that technology are elements that I'm really nostalgic for and have a special place in my heart because I grew up with it. So this was, I think, the first time I'd seen this in probably roughly 30 years, something like that. It's definitely since the early 90s, I would say, at the very latest. So it was a totally different experience going back, watching it as a kid, and then it having decades of reputation as one of the worst movies of all time. And then going back to it now with fresh eyes, adult eyes, I guess. So when did you first see it, and what is the experience like now by comparison?
The first time I saw it was later than you did. So this would have been early 1997. It was after the Star Wars special edition reissues when the trilogy came out and made oodles and oodles of money. And George Lucas was back in the news because he was also about to start shooting episode 1. And I had a CD-ROM called, I think this is the Blockbuster A Guide to Movies and Previews. And it was a CD-ROM that you just scroll through all these movies, and they gave you like 5-star reviews of movies, pictures, trailers, if it won Oscar, whatnot. And I remember getting to the Howard the Duck section, and I remember what said it was they called it one of the all-time great bombs. That kind of intrigued me. And then I remember at the same time they did an A&E biography on George Lucas, and it was a really big one because it was actually 2 hours when normally they were just an hour in and out. So they actually spent 2 hours talking about somebody, and they did a George Lucas one, and they like glided over Howard the Duck so quickly. I think I saw like a couple of it was not even a minute they discussed that movie, rightfully so. And so I finally rented the tape around that time in early '97. So I would have been 13. That's probably the right age to see that movie.
I was going to say, yeah, this feels like this has a very 13-year-old sensibility.
Oh, God. Because I was going to ask you if you would show a little girl this movie. Because if I were in your shoes, me personally, I would not show a child this movie. And I'm a pretty liberal guy when it comes to the movie. Parents let me watch in my very conservative upbringing. My parents were shockingly liberal. They're like, look, it's South Park is true. It's a joke on South Park, bigger long, but it's actually true. It was like, hey, is there nudity or sex? No, he can watch it. It's fine. Like it's fine. And but I wouldn't show a kid this. This is shocking.
It's pointedly not a kid's movie. I mean, I think that's the other thing. I feel like expectations were set when this was announced, with George Lucas involved, and he was coming off of he did Labyrinth, came out the same year, and then he had Indiana Jones, Temple of Doom a couple years before, and then obviously the Star Wars trilogy ended a few years earlier as well. So he was kind of on fire at the time, and so I think they were expecting maybe something a little more in line with those that fantasy work that he had done. And I think this was rated PG as well, because PG-13 hadn't really been solidified yet. It was like right around starting.
Well, it had been. That's what amazes me. How did this not get a PG-13? That shocks me. How did this not get that? This is 2 years after the rating was implemented. And I remember the VHS had, this scene contains footage that's not suitable for children, parental discretion advised, which we would see in front of a movie on USA Network or whatever in the 90s. Right. But and not in a PG fantasy adventure rated movie. This is the definition of a 13 movie. And I have to imagine, I never said this, but I kind of wonder if I wouldn't be surprised if they had to resubmit the ratings board a couple of times, because this is even when you think of the cabinet of 70s and early 80s movies pre PG-13 rating, that's sort of okay, there's nudity, there's some language, but they sort of let it slide. This really is it's shocking even for then how much. I actually counted. There's 4 different moments where he catches couples hardcore in the moment going at. Mm-hmm. Plus, there's the infamous duck nudity. Right. What else?
That's the thing too. Let's just the first. I can see them just initially being like, oh, it's a a man-sized duck walking around. Okay, that's fine, whatever. That sounds like a kid's movie slapping that on. But even later on, it gets more fantasy focused with more with the dark overlords of the universe and all that. But the first 20 minutes, there's the all the sexual references. He's reading a play duck, the duck nudity you mentioned. Beverly finds a condom in his wallet, and it's I was watching it, and I'm like, who is this movie for? Which audience? It's you can't decide.
Yeah, and when he saves Beverly, then one of the creeps goes, "You want to autograph my shorts?" And he pulls up his underwear. You're like, "Oh my God!" I didn't realize. Again, as a kid, you can't process this shit. I watched this as a 36-year-old, and you're like, "Oh God, what am I watching here? This is some strange shit." But I'll go back to Mr. Lucas if I can for a second, because you were mentioning his filmography, and this is at the same time period, because him and Steven Spielberg, they're best friends. They are still best friends. But they also had this thing where they had a friendly rivalry with each other. and the guys in the new Hollywood era did during the 70s. Spielberg also did with John Landis. And it was clear that in the 80s, Steve and George were the predominant figures. They were the ones who were going to be able to survive the death of the new Hollywood era with Michael Cimino's crazy ass and all that stuff with Gate. Suddenly Hollywood's like, okay, we're not going to let directors do what they want. Lucas and Spielberg were doing just fine. They were going to be able. They're doing okay. Anyway. So my point being is, they're set. What's the new goal now? And it was clear that you look at the biographies of both guys. They decided that, okay, who's going to be the new Walt Disney? Because you notice this movie, they say Steven Spielberg presents, George Lucas presents, and it was this thing where, okay, who's going to the goal first? Who's going to win and it's amazing to me that there's the expression, so and so lost the battle, but they won the war. God bless him, George Lucas. He didn't win a single battle. You take out, now you don't count Star Wars because that's his own thing. You don't count Indiana Jones because that's their thing together. So in that sense, poor George Lucas had nothing but letdowns that decade. I mean, you mentioned Labyrinth. That was same summer, huge bomb. Mm-hmm. This was a gigantic bomb that killed some critters. And then later he had to sort of go back to the well and go back to the sort of fantasy adventure sword and sorcery-esque material with Willow. And even that underperformed. Like, that didn't bomb, but it underperformed. And then he produced Tucker, A Man in His Dream for Francis Coppola. That bombed. The most successful thing he did that decade as a producer was that didn't involve Indiana Jones or Star Wars was Captain EO. And that wasn't even a theatrical movie.
It was funny to me how Labyrinth and Willow went on to become, well, certainly Labyrinth, Willow maybe to a lesser extent, to become like nostalgic, like cult favorite movies. And Howard the Duck has, I guess a so bad it's good kind of contingency of people that still rewatch it, but definitely the reputation has gone the complete opposite direction, even though they all did bad at theaters.
It was a bad word for many years. You could not mention this movie out loud. You can mention, Marvel or George Lucas. It was almost a thing where you can't mention this to Mr. Lucas. And I don't know when this started. I don't even know if the word acceptance would be the right term for the Duck. I guess it was when they did the special edition DVD in the mid-aughts. It got to be okay to talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't know before then, because it was kind of weird to, like, even as a 13, 14-year-old kid to be renting Howard the Duck. People going like, why are you renting this movie?
I don't know. It's a curious one. And that's why when you brought it up, I was like, oh, we got to talk about Howard the Duck, because that's an interesting conversation in and of itself. So do you think, obviously you said that you like the movie. Do you think that it's as bad as its reputation, even though it is a bad movie? Like, do you think I guess what it sounds like to me is that you think it's bad, but in an interesting way.
I think there's things that work about the movie. I won't know.
Yeah.
There are things that work about the movie. From a technical standpoint, I think John Barry's score is amazing. The visual effects, including the amazing stop motion work from Phil Tippett, is still top notch. I think Jeffrey Jones, putting an asterisk about the man he was in real life, which we have to do with all artists. Jeffrey Jones, he seems to be the only actor who's in on the joke. Yeah,
I think so.
I get that impression. I thought he came off very well in that movie. And you know what? Lea Thompson and the group Cherry Bomb, those pop tunes are actually really awesome. Like, I really like that stuff. And it's amazing because this is a series of what ifs. Certainly the fact of they first went to Landis to direct this movie. And I think the official reason they gave is John Landis thought the third act was too similar to Blues Brothers. I think that's a very political way of saying no. It was terrible because I don't think John, and I get the, I can see the logic because John Landis had also done Blues Brothers and Wolf in London, two on paper very weird movies that worked and made oodles of money. Both of them were huge hits. So I get going to Landis. That
worked, but probably shouldn't have worked in a way. Like on paper don't work. Yeah.
And he was the author of the screenplays so he in his head knew, like, he was there from the inception, where he's sort of a gun for hire at this point. You're going off of Hayek and Katz script. Another interesting asterisk is that we'll get to Howard himself, but originally he was supposed to be a CG creation. I don't know if that ever got out. It was sort of something I found doing some digging up factoids for this movie, but apparently they did some tests to see if they could make a fully computer generated character for 96, and the tests were so bad that they said, okay, it has to be it has to be someone in a suit. And when they were first developing the project, George Lucas was like, there is no way we're going to make this movie with a person in a suit, until they saw the footage. And they said, okay, we're doing someone in a suit. Like, it was that bad, apparently. I would love for someone to find this stuff. Yeah. That's right. And
he kept on that, though, for Jar Jar Binks about a decade or so later. The first CG,
That's right. And the third factoid, and I'll shut up for a second here, is the original, talking about weirdness. And I think it's a note. When they were first developing the script, Lucas tells Hike and Katz, okay, don't explain where it came from. That's the worst thing you can do. Just go with it, because they're either going to be, just don't even acknowledge that. The worst thing you do is create an origin story for this kind of material. I actually agree with that. And so the first draft that they submitted was radically different, where it's Howard the Duck is already on Earth. He's been on Earth for years. He's pre-established. He's a private detective living in Hawaii. And they submitted the script to Universal executives, and they were like, this is too weird. Do an origin story. And Lucas was like, all right. And like, they had to, once again, go back on what he said. Like, I was like, where's that script?
Right. Yeah, that would have been much better, I think. I mean, I think him as a private detective doing the film noir, I like, I watched some of the special features on the DVD, and they talked about wanting to shoot it in Hawaii initially, and how Lucas was drawn to the comic book because it was like this like absurdist noir story. And it makes me think of something like, which is another not good movie, The Happy Time Murders, was just trying to do a similar thing with like Muppets, but in like a adult oriented noir story. And I think Howard the Duck could have been a more interesting version of that. I don't know. I kind of feel like that would have been improvement in a way, just because it would, this movie, because it starts in Duckworld and it's trying to justify what he's doing here and all of that. I think it spends too much time trying to basically try to justify its own existence. Essentially, it's like, oh, don't worry, he's a duck here, but we're gonna explain how he got there and what's everything. So don't worry, it's gonna make sense. And then when you watch the movie, and you're like, no, it doesn't make sense. You just spent like half hour of the movie setting it up, and it still doesn't work. And not to mention all the like perverted duck sexual references. And the like the duck puns that are sprinkled throughout, which some are cute and some are like, ugh, really. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like that probably would have been a cleaner way in.
I feel like the other problem is like, and this is with all due respect, it's Hike and Katz themselves. Because I've had a theory about them. It's my second theory I'm going to pitch. I've always thought of them as sort of the cautionary tale to Citizen Gale. If you look at it, the filmographies, they're sort of streamed very side by side. Here's a writing, directing, producing team. One's the director, one's the producer, the other, both of them write the script, come up with the story. And they are championed by this auteur iconic director who has their free time. And as long as they got their buddy next to them, they can get the movie made. And unfortunately, they had like, you have Zemeckis and Gale, they had Spielberg, and then you had Hike and Katz, and they had Luke. And, Zemeckis and Gale were able to stand on their own 2 feet eventually, thanks to Romancing the Stone and Back to the Future. I know someone's listening to this going right now, well, Spielberg produced Back to the Future. Well, he wasn't that involved with Back to the Future, and he was only brought on later on. And everyone, even Spielberg said, look, they were going to make the movie without me. So you have to give them that. Hike and Katz, you can't point to a single thing they've done that didn't have George Lucas at work. I mean, like, if you've been able to sit through Best Defense, which, by the way, I tried, it's terrible. And they also wrote what was for many years regarded as the worst Indiana Jones movie, Temple of Doom, which has now been relegated. It's been propped up in part because of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I mean, I've always loved Temple of Doom, but I won't lie, it was the one I watched the least of the 3 of them, as much as I loved all 3 of them growing up. They also, wrote more American Graffiti. I think
Yeah.
so. They
did American Graffiti with him, which is
and then they famously did rewrite work on Star Wars. I think the problem lies there. I do think that maybe if you let them write the script, but you really needed to get another director. But I mean, then you think of like circa 1985, who do you hire to direct this movie? I mean, I don't know. David Lynch. I don't know. Hey, that's not a bad idea, actually.
No, it's not actually. But yeah. Hike did the only other movie he worked on after this theatrically was Radioland Murders, again, a Lucas production. And then that's it. He never directed another movie after this.
That's
one of the
career.
careers that got destroyed by Howard the Duck.
Lucas, him and Katz. I mean, even Lea Thompson. I mean, she was lucky to get her career to continue her career after she admitted. She very quickly was like, okay, I'll do Back to the Future too.
She got Back to the Futures, and then in the 90s was Caroline in the City. I think worked for her for a few years, and on the one of the featurettes I watched, she talked about having this basically the apex and the nadir of her career, like back to back. Back to the Future and then Howard the Duck, on 2 consecutive years, and how that really kind of put the industry into perspective for her ever since then. And I agree with you. I think she's not terrible in this, considering that she's supposed to be in love with a man-sized duck, basically. I think she sells a lot of it. She has, the Lea Thompson charisma. It basically she's riffing on. It feels like a variation on Lorraine Baines in Back to the Future. That she said. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say that in the other one, she's pretending to be in love with her son, and here it's a duck. And so I think she was probably able to channel some of that performance style into Beverly.
They do a weird thing though, and it's the lesser work because what struck me, there's a lot of cutaway shots of her laughing at what Howard says. It was a weird choice. Okay, I get it. You like him, all right? That's a weird thing. It's not, you can't tell me it's what someone says is funny because someone else is laughing. I have to determine that myself. I was thinking there's not a lot of laughing shots in Back to the Future. It's just funny. It makes it. Situations they come about and you're laughing at it by having to be hey. It felt kind of sitcom-y watching Howard actually when I rewatched it recently. I felt like this wouldn't be too different than watching an 80s episode of Family Ties or something. As strange as that sounds.
Yeah, I thought you were going to drop an Alf reference because that's another sitcom from the 80s with a puppet walking around. But she does so much work in carrying the movie, and like you were saying, in her scenes with Howard. I think Back to the Future is confident in that it has good material to work with, and this is just all right, Lea, we're limited technology with Howard, and the person inside the suit couldn't even see out of them, and we just had to just kind of do the actions and not be able to talk because the dialogue wasn't inaudible from inside the suit. And so it was a real technical challenge to pull that off. Not to mention that the script is not really good. So I think Lea Thompson deserved some kind of consolation prize for making her scenes with Howard as moderately compelling as they are. Especially the weirdest scene, of course, being the sex scene or the almost sex scene with her and Howard, where you have the erect feathers on his head and all that other stuff. So, do you want to weigh in on that scene?
Very subtle work there, for everybody.
Yeah, well, that's what they do.
The scene speaks for itself. Many better comedians have lampooned that scene than I could say anything. If you want a good laugh after you listen to this podcast, go check out We Hate Movies. They did an amazing takedown on this film that I still listen to every so often because it's so goddamn funny. I just how, Robert, I got to go back to something. Let's go back to a point. How did they, I know they talk about, I sort of back on my own argument. I said earlier, well, it's weird, so it's Back to the Future, but where was that executive to say, okay, can we cut the bestiality out of this? What the hell? This is a little different. Like there is a purity to how Lea Thompson plays her character in Back to the Future, as opposed to this. Like, she doesn't know that that's her son. This is this mysterious guy who just shows up into her town in purple underwear with his name on it. You know, my dad almost hit with a car, and it's a little different than like the Howard the Duck thing, because like it just like randomly gets into just it's this sort of randomness of like, okay, now they're going to become a couple. Even like Willard Hayek says, like, yep, at the end of the movie they become a couple. I'm like, oh, thanks.
Yeah, he's like, I like to think that Howard and Beverly are still together, and I'm like, oh, why?
Yeah, is this what you think about? Like, boy, my career got better. Like, I mean, because that's the other thing is like the alternate reality. If Howard the Duck had been a blockbuster, like, is the film landscape any different? I don't think it's that different with comic movies, personally. You know, film executives famously learn the wrong lessons every time out. So, you know, I still think Batman happens, you know, in 3 years and becomes the icon it is and everything like that. I think the best case scenario is there's a sequel, and it's maybe even weirder. But like, I don't think we suddenly get Marvel movies any sooner. You know, I mean, probably the big ramification of this movie doing well financially is there would be no Pixar, because famously this movie was such a disaster that Lucas had to sell off stuff just to keep himself afloat. Had to sell off his he had to sell off Pixar to Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
So we would most likely not have gotten Pixar as we know it without the failure of Howard the Duck, strangely enough.
It's really weird to think of that. But yeah, Dan, I think you might be right. I do also think probably Marvel wouldn't have sold all the movie rights to all their properties in, I think, the 90s, to the point that they still are like locked in a joint custody with Sony over Spider-Man. And I don't think they're the one time out that they tried to do something pre-90s film adaptation wise. It was Howard the Duck. I don't think that. Well, let me ask you this: is there a way they could have made this better? Is there a way that a Howard the Duck movie could have worked? And like, how would you have improved this? Like, how should they have approached the story, the source material? To be honest, I'm not really that familiar with the comic books either. So
that's the thing. I'm not really either. And I don't think apparently the comic books were more fourth wall. He was way more of a smart ass in a Groucho Marx sense, which I've seen like the images of the comic books. They're clearly doing Groucho Marx. I think that's a mistake in the fact that the voice actor is, you know, he's okay, but a little too, you know, high pitched, youthful Howard the Duck. When the impression I always got was he's supposed to be grizzled and older. I kind of am surprised they didn't go for someone else at that time period. I mean, I don't know who you'd get. Like, I'm blanking out. Like Danny DeVito ? As Howard the Duck. I don't know. I mean, like Ruffled or Walter. Walter Matthau was Howard the Duck. There you go.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, circa 86. I don't know. I mean, actually, it's funny because I really do wish they would try Howard the Duck again. I know it sounds completely crazy, but with Marvel trying to now really embrace the weirdness, because frankly, they need, you know, well, they haven't really lost Evans, as we found out. And, you know, look, spoiler alert, Robert Downey Jr. is going to come back too. Don't doubt that, kids. He's totally going to come back. But until that point, you know, they're going to try to do some different things to spice it up, keep people interested, because respectfully, all things come to an end, and this Marvel train will stop eventually, because people will tire of it and move on. I know you don't believe it, but it will happen. And I would like it if they would try new things, and they would really go for, hey, let's do Howard the Duck. Let's actually go for a Howard the Duck movie, or hey, yeah, a Hulu series where you can be more adult angled. And my brother, God bless him, had the perfect casting choice to voice Howard the Duck, Bruce Campbell.
That? Ooh, yeah, there you go.
I know, right? Can you imagine like a cigar smoking humanoid duck voiced by Bruce Campbell? Tickets sold. Like, yeah, man, I want that stuff. I think we live in the age of people embracing Guardians of the Galaxy and stuff like that, which certainly was weird, but it had some heavily mainstream appeal to it because James Gunn knew what he was doing. It just takes that right guy to find it. I'm not saying it needs to be James Gunn, but who knows? Respectfully, it wasn't Hayek of Cats, but nowadays, who knows who it could be? But I'm sure someone's got a Howard the Duck angle out there.
I mean, if they're doing a massive budget Disney Plus series on Scarlet Witch and Vision, I don't see them doing something weird with Howard the Duck. Doesn't feel like that much of a leap, even in the next few years. They've brought Howard the Duck. He had a cameo in Guardians, like the post-credit scene, and he's appeared like in the background in a couple of these movies. And he would feel completely at home if they did a Howard the Duck, like you were saying, like a Hulu series or something, and give it sort of a vibe of the Guardians / Ragnarok, now that like loopy kind of 70s or 80s era cosmic tale, and kind of spin it from there. And I think that would work basically. So they've kind of set it up for a retcon already in that regard.
I feel like the only reason they would not do it is it's too simpatico with failure. As we mentioned earlier, you could not mention that movie for many years to Marvel or anybody. It was a dirty word. And it might be, like sort of putting them in those movies, the cosmic films in the background is just a little, okay, wink, wink, nudge, nudge to our past, but like, we're not really going to go there. I feel like the ballsiest movie Marvel could do is to go there. Now, would they? I don't know, but I really wish they would.
Yeah, I would love that. I think, have him show up in Thor: Love and Thunder for a scene, and then people be like, "Oh my gosh, Howard the Duck kind of sold this movie. How did that happen?" And now we're at the point where the cosmic characters are visiting Earth and bouncing back and forth and everything. So you wouldn't really need to explain, well, do we have to see Duckworld? Like, no, nobody gives a shit anymore. Just roll with it. There's a duck. He's from space. There's a duck. You have a raccoon and a tree already. So it's all, the duck doesn't feel like a hard sell anymore.
Yeah. Or like, have him do a Howard the Duck team up movie with like the Hulk or somebody,
Yeah, whatever. Go for it.
Yeah. Why not? I'm all for it, man. Like, let's bring back Howard. Like, we're starting the campaign now. # bring back Howard. Like, it sounds better than the Snyder Cut.
Oh man, I'm curious about what the hell that's going to look like, and part of me kind of almost hopes that it's terrible because of how much fervor there has been around a certain demographic of the fans, and that it's like hailing it as the second coming of cinema, and it gets so blown out of proportion. I'm one of those people that's curious to see it, but I'm not pinning all my hopes on it. Like, I don't necessarily think it's going to be much better than the theatrical cut. It might be. I don't know. I have no idea what to expect with that. So I'm kind of just waiting to see what the hell that's going to even look like. But Howard the Duck, I'm all for it. And there are elements of this movie, like we were saying, that I think do work. It is very 80s in its weirdness, which we were saying, which I love. There's the scene at the diner, and the waitress has some really kind of funny moments with Howard.
Yeah, Cajun sushi. That whole bit's great. I like that bit. Yeah.
Yeah, the waitress who brings him eggs and he's horrified.
That's actually really funny because I never thought of that before. It's like, yeah, that was a recent joke that sort of landed on me. Like, oh yeah, I'd freak out too. Like, that was good. You know what is weird though? Is another like factoid is like during the production of this movie, Universal / Marvel's lawyers were constantly on the phone with Disney's lawyers because Howard the Duck's similarity to Donald Duck. Rewatching this as a 36-year-old adult man, he looks just like Daffy Duck. I'm surprised they got away with that.
Yeah,
he looks. They even like make a joke about it with poor Tim Robbins doing a Daffy Duck impression. Like, oof.
Oh man. Speaking, which we'll get to that in a second. But I also really liked Howard's sort of sarcastic comments to Tim Robbins' character Phil, like just his like comebacks to him. I thought some of that was funny. Like Howard being kind of the smartass, I thought was a lot more effective than Howard being horny all the time, I guess is what I'm going for.
Well, the fact that he's offended that he's been giving an IQ test by a janitor. I'm like, what's wrong with that? Like, what's wrong with that, dude? You're just a little bitch. So what? He's got to pay the bills, man.
It is weird that the worst, I would say almost unequivocally, the worst performance in this movie is future Oscar winner Tim Robbins. Would you agree with that?
Easily.
He is, every time he opens his mouth, it was really, really grating. What are your thoughts on?
But what was the direction on set? They're like, Tim, I need you to go to 8, and he gives him a 10.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just he went out there, man. That's sitcom acting. Like, oof. And like you talk about
sitcom acting too.
Yeah, bad sitcom acting. And this was 86. So 2 years later, he had his real career boom with Bull Durham, and then his career was like launched. He went from there, but like, man, that must have been a shaky 2 years when he's like, holy shit, like, am I gonna make this? I mean, he's the worst part of the movie.
Yeah, easily. Like,
but I feel like he was giving what he was being asked to deliver.
The character's pretty insufferable, like already. So I don't really. He was nominated for a Razzie. Not that I put much stock in the Razzies, but he was nominated for a Razzie for worst supporting actor. This movie was a big contender there, as we would assume. And
I'm sure it swept that year. I have no idea.
I'm sure it did.
I have no idea what won that year. Cobra? I have no fucking clue. Like, fuck the Razzies. But
I feel like you take that character Phil out, or you write him significantly better, and this movie is significantly more entertaining and less grating. It's because Lea Thompson, as we've already touched on, she's doing a pretty solid job here. Doing her own singing, as we mentioned. The music's pretty fun. The actors that are all collaborating to create Howard, I think the character's very inconsistent. I feel like there's also a nice chunk in the movie where he's like, I got to get back, but also I guess I'm stuck here. And I was like, wait, do you want to leave, or are you just giving up? Like, what the hell's going on? There's like a section where the movie's not sure what it's doing with Howard just yet, until Denning comes in and it becomes the whole like spectroscope.
Yeah, and it becomes an entirely different movie. Like, suddenly it turns into this like David Cronenberg body horror movie / chase movie with like all that stuff. You're like, this is a completely different movie now. Like, there's no more fish out of water component, which that's an entire movie. It's just Howard the Duck. Like, as they say, you're trapped in a world you didn't create. You can make a 90-minute movie right there. That's pretty funny. But like, then they go in this wildly different direction that, by the way, is completely, it comes out of left field. It's like watching From Dusk Till Dawn. All of a sudden you realize that there's vampires out of nowhere. You're like, what?
Right.
What Jeffrey Jones? Hi, what are you doing here? Dark Overlord, all that insane, which again, he's like the best part of the movie performance-wise, because he's in on the joke. He clearly gets this stuff. And the really horrific like makeup effects, not horrific in terms of the quality, it's top-notch makeup, but like it just looks just scary.
Yeah. Clearly,
this is, by the way, same summer as The Fly. So like audiences sure got their fix of body horror movies. That's the multiplex.
Well, there's the one scene where he's in the car with Lea Thompson, and like the talon things like shoots out of his mouth, and he plugs into the power to charge. Yeah, it was just
which was apparently too horrific for UK audiences. They had to cut that out of the movie.
Really?
Wow. Like, that's the scene you cut out, really?
Yeah, no, the bestiality thing was fine.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, we'll keep that shit in. Another fun fact was the movie was such a financial disaster in the United States that when it got to overseas, they were like, all right, here's how do we solve the problem? People not going to this movie. And literally the movie was renamed Howard, A New Breed of Hero. Mm-hmm. And you didn't even show him in the poster. You showed his like shadow. So if you're watching this weird poster, you think he's just a little person. You don't think he's a duck. What? That'll save the money. That'll save the movie. Yeah, I know people listen like, why did you guys pick that movie then? Because it's just fascinating to watch. Like
it is. It's definitely
it's not unwatchable.
Relic.
There are some bad movies that are like true disasters that are unwatchable, but like this is one of them. You can certainly sit through the 2-hour running length, and it's entertaining. Like certain jokes are funny. They're delivered. Yeah. Again, there's a lot of technical stuff that really is top notch to the movie. Money is on the screen, folks. Zero about that. something is just there's something about it, something in the stew that just makes the broth taste way off.
There was somebody who's doing a poll on film Twitter earlier this evening, and they were like, what do you prefer, a bad film or a boring film? And it was like 70 something % bad film, because there's nothing worse than sitting there being like, I don't really care. What is this? What's happening? Like, bad films are at least interesting to discuss, to dissect, to try and see like, well, I see what they were going for here. It didn't work. It's why people online or some people online are so fascinated by the Cats movie, because that's a wild swing of a movie. Does it work? Not really, but is it interesting to like figure out and be like, well, what the hell went wrong with all these people, all these actors and all this talent involved? And this is what you come up with. And I think this is a perfect example.
I agree. And like, that. To Tom Hooper, who gets a lot of shit from film Twitter for the silly reason that he had the gumption of besting David Fincher at the Oscars that year. But I look at his other movies and I go, he's made good movies. He's a director. And frankly, I'm not appalled that King's Speech beat Social Network, because that's a great movie in its own right. All right, it happens, film Twitter. Your favorite movie doesn't win all the time. So when speaking of it, we're dating this podcast, it's been 1 year since Parasite won. And film Twitter is obnoxiously gloating about it. And you can tell by the tone of my voice, I didn't like Parasite. We're not into a Parasite review right now, but I fucking hated that movie. And not into it. But like, that's the way life is, guys. You don't always get your way. So accept it.
Right. Yeah.
But like, my point being, my long-winded point being, I'm sorry, Robert.
No, you're fine. I want to hear it.
Cats isn't even the worst movie that I would argue. Cats is not the movie that Tom Hooper did. I'd say it's The Danish Girl, because that's just like boring crap. And I thought that was everything. I thought that was everything that Tom Hooper was falsely accused of being with King's Speech and Les Mis, which those are both really good movies. At least Cats is interesting. Like he's Mighty Casey. He got up to the bat. He got up to the batting cage. He swung. Now he didn't make it, but I appreciate him at least making the effort.
Right. Yeah. There's some choices at play in Cats. Let's put it that way. It's to the point that when I saw it, I told my wife, I'm like, you have to watch Cats with me. We have to do so we did a crooked commentary episode. We just recorded ourselves watching Cats, and she hadn't seen it before, which was a lot of fun because it's a really wild movie. But yes, going back to Jeffrey Jones, I was watching his performance in this movie, and I was like, at a certain point, it finally clicked. Men in Black completely ripped off this whole villain.
Oh
arc.
God, yeah.
Like 100, like beat for beat, pretty much.
But that movie made $600 million, so it's okay.
Yes, and it was produced by Spielberg. So I feel like somebody along the way must have been like, "Ooh, you know that thing in Howard the Duck? We could do." Like it feels like it's so similar that it almost can't be. It almost can't be by accident. It's literally possessed by an alien. His body starts to decay throughout the course of the movie. Takes a woman hostage, turns into a giant monster at the end, and is defeated. Like literally the exact same.
Yeah, that's. I never thought about that. He just pointed that out.
It's just Men in Black is a movie that works, and this is a movie that doesn't really work. But it's like it's funny to go back and watch movies that are cast aside and realizing, oh wait, your favorite movie from the 90s, they totally stole a significant portion of it from Howard the Duck of all places, the $5 bin at your local Walmart. They just dug around in there and took a giant plot point. Yeah,
exactly. But again, it's that tonal thing. Is Barry Sonnenfeld, who I'm not a big fan of either. He was the right fit for Men in Black. He got it, right. And I just don't think Lord Hyatt got it. With all due respect.
Yeah, I think it needed a more deft hand behind the camera for sure. But I think it sounds like we're in agreement in that this is definitely an interesting watch, if nothing else. It's entertaining in part, even when it doesn't work. It's just like, whoa, wow, we're doing that. All right. It has that sort of element to it. And it could work. There's something to this story that you could see why they would see the comic book and realize, well, that could be a really strange and interesting movie. The question is, can we adapt it properly? And they did somewhere along the line that focus got got lost or went askew. But I think that it's worthwhile for Marvel to go back and do something with this. It's just, it feels like it can't decide whether it wants to be a kid-friendly or family-friendly adventure movie or something like more trashy, like in the Fritz the Cat style, but not to that extreme.
Which I have to think that they were, Lucas and them had to have been watching Fritz the Cat at a certain point for an influence. They thought of that.
Yes.
I'd be surprised if they didn't.
Yeah, and initially this was even it was intended to be an animated film, but then they realized that would take too long to do it the way they wanted to, and so they were like, "Well, we'll do live action. We'll do technology."
They were contractually obliged to make a live action movie.
Oh, okay. There you go.
They were like, "All right, we have to," like, that would have been their way out of it. But man, even if it had animated, how would that have been received? That would have been like a year later, probably 87. So, that's would have been frowned upon, like because the people's notions of animation. This is 2 years before The Simpsons, so you still think of cartoons as being for children. Here's this cartoon with, sex and, duck condoms and duck nudity and all that fun stuff. And how does, imagine the outraged parents. And again, going back to the start of this podcast, we grew up watching some stuff that was clearly on edge that they just don't make for kids nowadays. Mm-hmm. I'm not a fan of the movie, but Monster Squad is a movie to be appreciated by for no other reason than there's kids cussing and swearing and killing monsters with guns and arrows. And this would be so, oh my God, crucified by film Twitter today if they tried to make it. It would never get made. So many movies. I love
the Monster Squad. I grew up with the Monster Squad hardcore. That's another one of those. Right in the nostalgia.
They would never make it. They'd never make it. There's very few movies that we grew up watching that I feel like they would make today. Very few. Maybe E.T.
E.T. would skate by. I think they would probably stick to the walkie-talkies instead of guns kind of approach if they made it now, for sure.
Oh God, absolutely.
And so much of my wife and I, we both really appreciate and we kind of consider it a more of a horror movie than anything else. Return to Oz. So Return to Oz and the Labyrinth, the Willows, the Never-Ending Stories. These movies would scare the shit out of kids now, just because they're more used to the Minions and the Secret Life of all of that. Very few kids movies today are not pandering, are kind of helping trying to make serious adult themes accessible to kids and through fantasy and adventure and that kind of thing. And I feel I miss that
thing. I miss it too. And it's the thing where not to sound like the two old parts of the room here, but we did have it better growing up because there was a sense of we can tell not sugarcoating everything for us. You can tell a fun movie where the good guys win, but like life, there's consequences and there is edge and there is darkness, and there are some of these great movies that we have those disturbing scenes that we remember. You mentioned Return to Oz, which freaked out so many people in 1985 growing up.
Yes.
And this is someone who my first movie obsession was The Wizard of Oz. That's one of my top 3 favorite movies of all time is the 1939 movie. Mm-hmm. I think kids growing up now are getting these, you mentioned the Minions. It's just let's do very baby safe cartoons that are just no threat, no edge. You don't really learn anything. Pop culture crazy with jokes. Right. There isn't a timelessness to it. Another childhood movie I think of is Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Edgy. And that's 72 or 70. Mm-hmm. It's early 70s. So that wouldn't get made now. I know they're trying to do a prequel about young Willy Wonka. I guarantee you, even if that movie gets made, and Paul King, God bless you, go for it, brother. It won't have the edge of that first movie.
Yeah, there's very few and far between, and it's unfortunate because when you're telling these stories through the prism of fantasy and things like that, that gives you more leeway to go there, to go darker places. I think one of the only movies in the last decade or so that I think that it kind of fits in the same category as the ones that we're talking about is something like Coraline, where that's a really dark movie, but it's ostensibly for kids, and it's using a sort of fantastical premise to get that, that point across, and get that it's not like harrowing in a realistic way. It's all through artifice and supernatural forces and all that dream state kind of thing. So it doesn't really, it's able to harken back to the Never Ending Story days and stuff. Let's see. Is there anything else about Howard the Duck that we haven't talked about? Now that we were on a complete tangent there, but I feel like it's relevant enough, considering this movie kind of wants to be for kids, kind of doesn't give a shit about kids. It's unclear. Is there anything else about Howard the Duck we haven't mentioned that you wanted to make sure we cover before we start winding down?
I can't think of any. This without any condescending, I appreciate it for existing.
Yeah,
it's they don't make them like this anymore. There's a great paraphrase. There's a quote. Josh Olson of Trailers to Hell said this in one of his commentaries, and he was taking the quote from someone else. I'm going to paraphrase the quote right now. It's regarding 70s movies, but it applies to 80s movies. You have to take the good with the bad. You can't just get Francis Coppola going off to make Darkness in Vietnam without getting Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The same level of thinking with these people who made the movies. You have to take the bad with the good, and we don't get that anymore.
I think that's part of why I think this movie was worth talking about for this episode, because I don't really like when film Twitter or critics or whoever just dismiss movies out of hand. You're like, oh, that's garbage. That's dog shit, whatever. I'm like, well, wait, hold on a second. Let's reassess and see what lessons are to be learned, or what entertainment value there is to be gained. Like we were saying earlier, a bad film is way more interesting to talk about than a boring film. And I think there's there's basically no way you can call Howard the Duck a boring film. So it has that going for it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So Jamie, can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
I'm still on Twitter, which I keep meaning to dismantle it because I'm kind of growing to despise Twitter. But Film Nerd, for at the moment, @ Jamie on Twitter is where you can find me.
Awesome. Jamie, this was a blast. Thank you so much for bringing Howard the Duck to the table, a sentence I never thought I would say.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And it was interesting for me to go back after, like I said, like probably 30 years to see this and realize that this is one of those movies that I can't believe I saw as a child, and just how unkid friendly it really is. Just to put in context, that basically anything with puppets, my parents would be like, "Oh, I'm sure it's fine. It's for kids." I saw the Garbage Pail Kids movie a lot when I was really little too, and I haven't seen that in forever. So I feel like now I owe it to myself to track that down and be like, Jesus Christ, not only is this terrible, this is unwatchable. That might actually be unwatchable.
Next week on Crooked Table Podcast.
Oh God. Well, Mulholland Drive notwithstanding, where I am kind of on a like mid 80s nostalgia kick this year so far. So we'll see. Maybe, who knows? Maybe Real Kids movie would be that.
Maybe.
That was our chat about Howard the Duck from 1986. Big thanks to Jamie Williams for once again coming back on the show. What a fun chat we had about a very bizarre, oddly entertaining movie. It was really weird to go back and revisit this so long after having seen it as a kid. But we're still working our way through the final round of episodes as the Crooked Table Podcast. The show must go on. And next week, we'll be joined by Philip Boone of Sports Flicks, Just Give Us Clicks, where we'll be discussing the 1993 sports drama, Rudy. We had a really great conversation. I'm excited to share that with you guys. In the meantime, please find me, Robert Yanis Jr., on Twitter at Crooked Table, Instagram, same handle, and at crookedtable.com for all the updates on upcoming shows and other projects that we have in the works over at Crooked Table Productions. A lot of stuff happening on the back end right now. But that's all in the future. I've been Rob. Keep it crooked, everybody.
This has been a production of crookedtable.com. All rights reserved.
That's the yard of a little KED.